I've been a roadside assistance dispatcher for almost 15 years now. I've heard all kinds of stories, from the mundane to the truly bizarre. But there's one call I received about 6 years ago that still haunts me to this day. It was a particularly nasty night in October, the kind of storm where the rain comes down in sheets so thick you can barely see a foot in front of you. Lightning was cracking across the sky every few minutes, and the wind was howling like something alive. We always get a lot of calls during weather like this: flat tires, dead batteries, people sliding off the road. It's just part of the job. Around 11:30 p.m., I got a call from a young woman named Ellie. Her voice was shaky, and at first, I thought it was just a bad connection because of the storm. She told me she'd been driving on Highway 16, a rural stretch that cuts through dense forest about 40 miles outside of town, when her car had suddenly died. No warning lights, no sputtering, just complete shutdown. I took down her information and her location, which she got from her GPS, and assured her that help would be on the way within the hour. She sounded relieved, but also, I don't know, hesitant? Like she wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. I asked if she was all right, if she felt safe, and she paused for a long moment before saying, "There's someone standing in the rain." I remember my skin prickling. I asked her to explain, and she said that about 30 feet ahead of her car, illuminated only when lightning flashed, was a person just standing in the middle of the road. Not moving, not seeking shelter, just standing there in the downpour, facing her direction. I advised her to keep her doors locked and stay in the vehicle. She agreed, and I promised that our driver would be there soon. I immediately dispatched our closest driver, Eddie, giving him the GPS coordinates and explaining the situation. I also made a note to call her back in 15 minutes to check on her. When I called back, her voice was much quieter. She whispered that the figure had moved closer to her car. It was now about 15 feet away, still just standing there, unmoving despite the ferocious wind and rain. She couldn't make out features, just a dark silhouette. I told her that help was on the way and to stay on the line with me. She agreed. About 5 minutes into our call, she suddenly went silent. "Ellie?" I said. "Ellie, are you there?" A few seconds passed before she responded, her voice now barely audible. "It's at my window now," she whispered. "It's just standing there. I can't see a face." I felt my heart drop. I asked her if she could drive away, but she reminded me her car wouldn't start. I was about to tell her to climb into the back seat, away from the windows, when she let out a small gasp. "It's knocking," she whispered. "It's knocking on the glass." I told her not to open the door under any circumstances. I checked the GPS tracking on Eddie's truck. He was still 20 minutes out. I asked Ellie if she could see anything else about the figure, thinking that it might just be another stranded motorist seeking help. There was a long silence. "Ellie?" I prompted. "It's not a person," she said, her voice suddenly calm in a way that was more unsettling than her fear had been. "I don't think it's a person at all." Before I could ask what she meant, the call cut out. I tried calling back immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. I radioed Eddie, telling him to hurry and alerting him to the potentially dangerous situation. When Eddie arrived at the coordinates 20 minutes later, he radioed in, sounding confused. He said there was no car there, no sign anyone had been there at all. I double-checked the coordinates, confirmed they were correct, and told him to check the immediate area, thinking maybe the GPS had been slightly off. After a few minutes, Eddie radioed back. He'd found Ellie's car about a quarter mile down the road. It was parked perfectly on the shoulder, hazard lights still blinking. But there was no sign of Ellie. The car was empty, the driver's side door locked. The police investigation found nothing, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Ellie's purse and phone were still in the car. The engine, when tested, started perfectly. There was no mechanical failure they could identify. Ellie herself was never found. Here's the detail that still keeps me up at night. Eddie told me later, off the record, that when he approached Ellie's car, even though it hadn't rained for hours by then and the roads were beginning to dry, there were wet footprints leading away from the driver's side door, not shoe prints, bare footprints. And they didn't start at the car and lead away. They came from the woods, circled the car completely, and then led back into the woods, along with a second, smaller set, walking beside them. I quit my job 6 months later. I couldn't handle taking calls from stranded motorists on rainy nights anymore. I kept imagining them looking out their windows, seeing a dark figure standing in the rain, watching them, waiting. The windshield wipers struggled against the downpour, creating brief moments of clarity before the rain once again obscured my view of the narrow mountain road. I was exhausted, having driven for nearly 6 hours straight, but the closest motel was still another 40 minutes away according to my GPS. My phone battery was at 12%, and I silently cursed myself for forgetting my charger at the conference. It was nearly midnight when my headlights caught the silhouette of someone standing at the edge of the road. A figure, drenched from the rain, thumb extended in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. I normally wouldn't stop, especially on a night like this, but something about their desperate stance made me slow down. She was young, maybe early 20s, with dark hair plastered to her pale face. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her thin frame. "Thank you," she said, as she climbed into the passenger seat. Her voice was barely audible over the pounding rain. "I didn't think anyone would stop." "What are you doing out here?" I asked, turning the heater up. "There's nothing for miles." "My car broke down a few miles back," she replied, her eyes fixed straight ahead. No reception to call for help. Something felt off. Her clothes weren't just wet, they seemed to be dripping more water than they should, creating a small puddle beneath her seat. And despite the heater blasting, she shivered continuously. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to sound casual while stealing glances at her. "Just up ahead," she said. "There's a turnoff about 10 minutes from here." We drove in silence. The rain intensified. An occasional lightning illuminated the sky, briefly turning night into day. During one such flash, I glanced at my passenger, and my blood ran cold. In that split second of brightness, her reflection in the passenger window showed not a young woman, but something elsey, gaunt, hollow-eyed face, with skin that seemed to hang loosely on prominent bones. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, my exhaustion playing games with my mind. "Right here," she suddenly said, pointing to a barely visible dirt road cutting through the dense forest. "This is my turn." "I don't think my car can handle that road in this weather," I said, slowing but not turning. "Please," she insisted, her voice taking on an edge that made the hair on my neck stand up. "I need to get home." Against my better judgment, I turned onto the muddy path. The car lurched and slid, but I managed to keep it on the increasingly narrow track. After about half a mile, we came to a small clearing where the remnants of what must have once been a house stood, just a stone foundation and a collapsed chimney, everything else long since reclaimed by nature. "This is it," she said, smiling for the first time. "Thank you for bringing me home." "But there's nothing here," I stammered, peering through the rain at the ruins. She turned to me, and in another flash of lightning, I saw her clearly. Her skin had a bluish tint, and water seemed to be continuously running from her hair, her clothes, her skin as if she were perpetually submerged. "There was, once," she said softly, "before the flood took everything. 5 years ago tonight." My phone buzzed with a news alert, despite the low battery and lack of reception earlier, and I glanced down reflexively. The headline made my stomach drop. 5-year anniversary of mountain flood disaster. 23 lives lost. When I looked up, she was gone, leaving only a puddle of water on the seat and floor. I reversed out of there so fast I nearly got stuck twice, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't until I was back on the main road that I noticed something on my Phonia photo that hadn't been there before. It showed a smiling young woman standing in front of a small cabin that must have once stood where those ruins now lay. She was wearing the exact same clothes as my passenger. The timestamp on the photo, exactly 5 years ago, to the day. The rain continued to pour as I drove through the night, no longer stopping for anyone, my eyes darting to every shadow at the edge of the road. And though I eventually made it to the motel alive, I swear I can still hear her whisper whenever it rains, "Thank you for bringing me home." I work as a long-haul trucker, mostly covering the Pacific Northwest. You spend enough time on the road, especially at night, and you're bound to see some strange things. Most drivers I know have at least one story they can't explain. This is mine. It happened about 3 years ago. I was driving a route I'd done dozens of times before, hauling timber from northern Washington down to Portland. It was early March, and a late-season storm had rolled in, bringing heavy rain and wind that rocked my rig. I normally enjoy driving in the rain. There's something peaceful about being warm and dry in your cab while the world outside gets drenched, but this storm was something else. Visibility was near zero, and I was considering pulling over to wait it out when I saw him. There was a man standing on the shoulder of the road, thumb out, completely soaked. No car nearby, no bags, just a lone figure in what looked like a dark workman's jacket. Now, I don't usually pick up hitchhikers' company policy and common sense, but something about seeing someone out in weather like that tugged at me. I thought about my own son, who was about this guy's age. What if he was stranded somewhere and needed help? Against my better judgment, I slowed the rig and pulled over. The man jogged up to the passenger side, and I leaned over to open the door. Rain blew in, along with the hitchhiker, who quickly pulled the door shut behind him. "Thanks," he said, his voice oddly calm for someone who'd been standing in a downpour. "Appreciate the ride." He was younger than I'd thought, maybe early 20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His clothes were completely soaked through, water pooling beneath him on the seat, but he didn't seem bothered by it. What struck me most, though, were his eyes. They were pale blue, almost colorless in the dim light of the cab, and they didn't seem to blink as often as they should. "Where are you headed?" I asked, pulling back onto the road. "Just up ahead," he said vaguely. "There's a turnoff a few miles up. Leads to my home." I nodded and focused on driving. The rain hadn't let up, and I needed all my concentration for the road. We drove in silence for a while, the only sounds being the drum of rain on the roof and the steady swish of the wipers. After a few minutes, I glanced over at my passenger. He was staring straight ahead, completely still, water still dripping from his hair and clothes. Something about him was making me increasingly uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on what. "Bad night to be out walking," I said, trying to break the tension I was feeling. He turned those pale eyes to me. "I wasn't walking," he said. "I was waiting." "Waiting for what?" I asked. His face broke into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "For you, Carl." I nearly drove off the road. I hadn't told him my name. My license was visible on the dashboard, but it only showed my first initial, C. There was no way he could have known my name was Carl. "How do you know my name?" I demanded, gripping the wheel tighter. He ignored my question. "Do you remember this stretch of road, Carl? Does it seem familiar to you?" I looked out at the highway, barely visible through the rain, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. There was something familiar about it, but I couldn't place why. I'd driven this route countless times. 3 years ago, he continued, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality, like he was reciting something. "It was raining, just like tonight. You were behind schedule, pushing to make your delivery. The visibility was poor. You didn't see the car that had pulled over with a flat tire." My blood ran cold. I remembered now. 3 years ago, almost to the day, I'd been in an accident on this very stretch of road. It had been raining heavily, and I'd sideswiped a car on the shoulder. I'd stopped, called for help, but the driver hadn't made it. It was the worst night of my life, something I'd never forgiven myself for, even though the investigation had ruled it an accident due to the weather conditions. "Who are you?" I whispered, my mouth suddenly dry. He turned to face me fully now. Water was still streaming from his hair, but I realized with growing horror that it wasn't just running off him. It seemed to be coming from him, as if he was made of water himself. "You know who I am, Carl," he said softly. "You think about me every day. You see my face in your dreams." I did know. He was the spitting image of the young man who had died that night, whose car I had hit, but that was impossible. I was just tired, stressed, my mind playing tricks on me. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to him. "You're not real. Pull over, Carl." he said, his voice suddenly echoing strangely in the cab. "It's time we talked properly." Against all reason, I found myself steering the truck to the shoulder of the road, the exact spot where the accident had happened 3 years before. As soon as I put the truck in park, the rain seemed to intensify, hammering on the roof so loudly I could barely hear myself think. "What do you want from me?" I asked, unable to look at him now. "I want you to know that I forgive you," he said. I turned to him in shock, but the passenger seat was empty, the door was closed, and there was no sign anyone had been there. No water on the seat, no wet footprints on the floor mat. I sat there for a long time, listening to the rain and trying to make sense of what had happened. Eventually, I put the truck in gear and continued my journey, shaken to my core. The strange thing is, after that night, the guilt that had been eating me alive for 3 years began to fade. I still think about the accident, about the young man who lost his life, but the crushing weight of it has lifted. I've driven that stretch of highway many times since then, always in the rain, always half expecting to see him standing there with his thumb out. I never have. But sometimes, when the rain is particularly heavy and the wipers can barely keep up, I catch a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, a figure sitting in the passenger seat, watching the road ahead with pale blue eyes. I don't pick up hitchhikers, but on rainy nights, I drive extra carefully, watching for cars on the shoulder, for people who might need help. And sometimes, I swear I can hear a voice, barely audible over the sound of the rain, telling me that it's okay, that I'm forgiven. That's my story. Make of it what you will. But next time you're driving on a rainy night and see someone with their thumb out, think carefully before you stop. You never know who or what might be getting into your car. If you enjoyed these true horror stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more. Sweet dreams, and try not to think about these tales the next time you're caught in a downpour.